The world around us is filled with old, new, and upcoming technology. Innovation is the universal language the modern world speaks, and the past few decades have only further proven this fact. We've had commercialized computers, improved TVs, modern electric cars, and today, innovation continues to push us towards the future, with artificial intelligence revolutionizing the way we live our lives. With all the major technologies that have fundamentally changed how our societies function, it seems ironic that possibly the greatest invention of all can fit in your pocket. The smartphone, a device that's become so popular we barely need to explain what it is. But how much do we really know about these mobile computers? Were smartphones always as big of a success as they are today? What other aspects of our lives did they impact behind the scenes? How did we go from room-sized computers to ones we can hold in our hand? And most importantly, why did the smartphone in particular change the world so drastically? To truly answer these questions, we have to go back to a world very different from today. A world before texting was an everyday activity, before encyclopedias stopped being printed, before online shopping and modern social media. A world before the smartphone.
Once it was a dream embodied by comic strip hero Dick Tracy talking to his wristwatch radio phone. Now the portable phone is a reality.
The craze for sending text messages shows no sign of abating.
This is the new generation of mobile telephone.
Apparently, cell phones affect your brain. I guess it affects your brain when you're being shouted at by your mother.
The size of this handset is likely to get even smaller.
Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything.
The 80s was perhaps the most innovative decade in America. These years saw huge changes in the ways people live both aesthetically and functionally. It was the era of pop culture's popping colors, the beginning of the internet, and questionable fashion choices. The 80s were centered around freedom. Historical events like the de-escalation of Cold War tensions and the removal of the Berlin Wall, along with cultural events like the fix-it-yourself parenting and pop culture craze of the 80s, provided a sense of freedom and optimism for kids and adults alike. Innovation during the decade focused on quality of life improvements for the average family. Rotary phones were replaced with fancier push-button phones, and party lines, shared with neighbors, were replaced with private lines, allowing for much more freedom with calling. The idea of a mobile phone promised even more of this freedom, and the race for companies to invent one was on. In 1984, the communication and electronic company Motorola released the world's first mobile phone to the public, the Dynatac 8000X, nicknamed the Brick Phone. Not only was it almost a foot long, weighing roughly 2.5 pounds, but its battery life only allowed its user 30 minutes of talking with a charging time of 10 hours. Nokia's Mobira Talkman released shortly after, giving rise to the infamous box phones, requiring lunchbox-sized containers to be carried with them. The 80s was a transition period for mobile phones, from an idea to a reality. Mobile phones of the 80s appealed only to a niche market of wealthy consumers who were willing and able to buy them. Even though their impact was not felt immediately by the public, the expensive and awkward phones of the 80s acted as stepping stones for the growing market that, in the later decades, would shift its focus to cheaper, more reasonable products for consumers. The rise of mobile phones in the following years would cause one of the most dramatic cultural shifts in America, as people began to choose connection over privacy, efficiency over quality, and convenience over authenticity. Many large companies around the world started to see the potential of mobile phones, and hoped to be the ones to capitalize on what could be the next big thing. But even the most hopeful investors in mobile phones could not imagine how impactful they would become. While the 80s certainly marked the beginning of the mobile phone industry, the 90s were the most crucial for bringing these new technologies to a wider consumer base. Advancements in lithium-ion batteries in the early 90s offered a huge leap in how consumer-friendly mobile phones could be. Most communication companies in the 90s focused on appealing to larger audiences by making their phones cheaper and more convenient. Phones made during the decade like the Nokia 1011, a slim phone released in 1992 at a lower price of $350, and the Motorola StarTAC, the world's first flip phone inspired by the portable communicators in Star Trek, became more successful than any phones before them by following a common trend, being simple and cheap, yet effective. The IBM Simon Personal Communicator, announced in 1994, however, did not follow this trend. It could make calls and texts like most phones, but could also send and receive emails, faxes, and pages, as well as take notes, store addresses, create schedules, or look at a world clock or calendar. It was also the first phone that boasted a touchscreen. However, in a world where wireless phones were becoming less of a toy for the wealthy and more of a must-have device, the expensive, unconsumer-friendly Simon was less of a success, but its impact on the industry is still felt today. The Simon Communicator was so advanced that people came up with an entirely new term to describe it: IBM's Simon Personal Communicator, the world's first smartphone. By the end of 1996, about 45 million people in the US use wireless phones or pagers. Mobile phones even started appearing in pop culture, with movies like The Matrix showing off the newest Nokia phone released at the time. In the late 90s, several revolutionary phone features, such as mobile gaming, colored screens, internet browsing, cameras, and built-in GPS, started appearing, as companies tried to make a name for themselves in the growing market. The phone craze of the late 90s was the origin of the hyper-competitive tech industry we see today. Companies had to innovate more than ever just to stay relevant in the eyes of the public, but a few companies found new ways to stay ahead. In 1999, the company Research in Motion, or RIM, created the BlackBerry 850, a pager capable of syncing schedules, tasks, and contacts with a home computer. The ease of use and the low $350 price of the first BlackBerry made it ideal for business professionals, and RIM would continue to dominate the industry for years because of this. But change was still on its way. For the phone industry, the 2000s was the decade of societal changes, the decade of dreamers, and the decade of the smartphone. In the 2000s, new technology was everywhere. By this time, most people carried a phone for communication, an MP3 player like the newly released iPod for on-the-go music, a personal digital assistant, PDA, for scheduling, and had a computer at home for advanced tasks and internet browsing. By the 2000s, phones had become a necessity for business workers, and many companies began releasing phones with extra capabilities that they labeled smartphones. The evolution of technology and the popularity of mobile phones had shifted society from the more laid-back lifestyle of the 80s to a world where efficiency and instant information were valued the most. Competition in the phone industry continued pushing this trend even further. An improved BlackBerry smartphone was released in 2002 with even more features. The physical keyboard and security of these devices made them ideal for most businesses and consumers for most of the decade. But in 2007, Steve Jobs, the CEO of a struggling computer company called Apple, made an announcement of 3 new devices the company would release.
Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone.
The announcement of the iPhone was a major turning point in the way the public saw mobile phones. Apple proposed that in a world with so many separate devices, a smartphone wasn't just one more device, but all of them. However, many people, including competitors like Microsoft's CEO, felt that Apple's radical changes would lead to the iPhone's failure.
$500? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine. We're selling millions and millions and millions of phones a year. Apple is selling 0 phones a year. And let's see how the competition goes.
Turns out, the iPhone did pretty well. Its design and interface opened people's eyes to what smartphones could be, allowing easy and intuitive access to many things that once needed a separate device, and causing more people than ever to purchase their own. Smartphones are essential today and play a crucial part in our everyday lives. More than half of kids have one by age 10, but the industry and mobile phones as a whole are not without controversy. The efficiency promoted by smartphones led to generations with shortened attention spans and less social interaction. The increase in depression rates is often attributed to smartphones and social media, and the technology production has led to many environmental concerns as well. Today, Apple's hold on the communication industry is secure. Less competition means less advancement, and phones seem to bring fewer new features with each release. The hyper-competitive nature of the 90s and 2000s led to many unjust business practices as companies tried to get ahead. Apple has been accused of interfering with workers' rights and discriminating against U.S. citizens when hiring, preferring foreign workers who were used for cheaper labor. The mobile phone boom of the 90s and 2000s left America unrecognizable to how it was before. Today, it is hard to count how many times a day we reach for our phones, or how many normal things we wouldn't be able to do without them. The 80s now feel alien to most people. The freedom and the personality of the past several decades is less present today. The world is different now, but is it any better? The public's obsession with instant information and satisfaction brought on by smartphone culture makes the world seem more shallow. It's ironic that in a world where we always have access to limitless information, entertainment, and communication, many people feel less connected today than they did before. Over-reliance on smartphones can have many negative effects, but online schooling in times of lockdown, quick digital meetings, and international relationships show that when used in correlation with real interaction, smartphones can enhance our lives as well. There are so many ways a smartphone can impact our lives, both good and bad, but perhaps the biggest change they offer is the ability for anyone to take control of their lives, pursue their passions, and have their own voices heard. The importance of smartphones is not determined by what they can do, but what we will do with them. And for the first time in our history, our choices are not limited. The rise of smartphones has brought us to a future where for some, life seems harder, a future where for others, life seems filled with possibilities. But most importantly, the rise of the smartphone has brought us to a future where your future is in your hands.